Good morning. Good morning. I'm Marcus Ruiz Evans, founder of the Cal Exit movement with the book California's Next Century 2.0, published in 2012, and the first article on California being thought of as an independent nation ever covered responsibly or respectably by the news in an article called How Could California Do on Its Own by Tom Elias, the well-respected reporter, in 2013. Later on, I met other people and built the organization. So effectively, I am the grandfather of the concept of California independence. I like to show off some of my acumen, and I'm dedicated to keeping everyone informed about this topic. I wrote the book. I started the movement. And while we're going through some difficulties right now, I'm always dedicated to the topic of California pursuing its destiny and being akin to an independent nation. That dream has fired me up since 2005. Almost 20 years. I'll never leave it. Now, maybe I'll leave organizations and people, but the thought was mine to start with, and I will never abandon it. Let's get into some now national divorce talk. There's a lot that's happened recently over the holiday break. Hope you had a great holiday, but let's get into it right now. Again, we're going to try to keep it light, although the topics are somewhat a little bit heavy. Apologies, but it is the nature of the beast. Let's get right into it. So the first thing we want to talk about is an article by the Washington Post. Now, the Washington Post has an article out recently called Secession Might Seem Like the Lesser of Two Evils. It is also the least likely. We'll show you that article in a second. But some of the points we want to make out now, that article is going to say that a professor predicts or repeats the same prediction first made by me, that there will be a secession attempt in America in the future. So we have an actual college professor who studies these things saying, yes, secession is definitely going to happen sometime in the future in America. He does not identify where or who, but he says definitely. Now, what's interesting is that I interviewed that professor a year ago where he made the same prediction. At that time, nobody was covering it. I was the first person to cover this professor saying it. Now his prediction went from local media with me to mainstream media at one of the largest publications ever. I think that shows the gravitas of the idea going from extremist ideas to now mainstreaming conversation. So I did an interview with the professor. Almost no one saw it. Washington Post does an interview. Now everyone sees it. He's saying the same thing. The concept is becoming mainstream. Remember that idea. We're going to get back to it in a second. Here you go. This is why. The Washington Post admits that secession talk is becoming normalized, a prediction that I made a year ago. So we just talked about how the professor was interviewed by me. Almost no one saw it. He makes the same prediction now a year later. Everyone sees it. That's normalization of the dialogue. It went from fringe topic to mainstream topic. The same newspaper that covers this professor is also admitting the normalization of the topic, something that I predicted a year ago. They also talk about how there's a survey showing almost 50-50 support amongst everyone for separation. And finally, they have to go back to the standard media talking point about how secession is a misinterpretation of American law. So I'm going to show you the quotes. I'm going to show you the article, and then we'll get into it. So you can double check everything. You do not have to believe me. If you know me, you know I'm about sources and thorough documentation. So you're going to see what I'm saying they're saying. You're going to see the actual article. You're going to see the actual quotes. You can double check everything. But all the material is also going to be packaged into these videos because I like people to watch one video and be fully informed. I understand that your time is important. I understand that you don't have time to cover all these things. I understand that you don't have time to wade into the myriad of contexts and news sources to make sure that you're informed of everything. That's why I make these videos. You can watch one video and be fully informed about everything related to national divorce. If you think that's an important topic, if you like the information here, please subscribe, please like. It helps me get more videos out. Thank you. So here are the quotes to back up what we talked about. This is literally in the Washington Post article. I'll show you in a second. A survey published in September by the University of Virginia Center for Politics, for example, found that 41% of Biden voters and 52% of Trump voters had somewhat agreed that it would be better having a separation or peaceful divorce. 41% of the left, 52% of the right. 41% is damn close to 50. That's almost 50-50 support for secession amongst Trump voters and Biden voters. And this survey was taken by a reputable university right after the election. And it said that the people who voted, almost 50-50, are saying, let's divorce. Now, half of the Trump supporters are saying, let's not divorce. And about 60% of the Biden voters are saying, let's not divorce. But half of the Trump supporters are saying let's divorce, and almost half of the Biden voters are saying let's divorce. That's significant. Another quote, secession as an actual political program is being normalized in an unwinding and degrading country. So that was Richard Kreitner wrote a book on secession where he mentioned me and my work on secession. So one of the top two books out last year was by a former speechwriter by Donald Trump called American Secession. And I think this one's called Breakup by Richard Kreitner, someone on the left. So someone on the right wrote a book, someone on the left wrote a book, Richard Kreitner. And then Professor, I also interviewed him, former speechwriter, and they both mentioned me and the work for secession. Kreitner is an expert on secession because he wrote the book. And what he's saying is the topic is being normalized, something, again, I predicted a year ago. And that we've seen again in this article. So the article shows, here's an interview with the professor saying secession is going to happen. Last year when I did that interview, nobody cared. Now the same professor saying the same thing, everybody's talking about it. And an expert on secession is also in the same article saying the topic is becoming normalized. Interview with the professor on a fringe topic. Now it's a mainstream article. In that same article documenting that, they say the topic's becoming normalized. So you see the article interviewing experts saying the topic of secession is being normalized, and you see normalization happening in the same article. Here's the professor that I interviewed, Ryan Griffiths, a professor at Syracuse University, said there will be another secession movement in the United States. I interviewed Professor Ryan Griffiths in January 2020. This article came out in December 2021, basically 2022. One of the things I have to point out is that the Washington Post admitted when they were talking about how silly secession is, they were saying most people would be poor. Again, an argument that I've made. So when people talk about secession of California will lead to the breakup of America, I always, for the last 2 years, said no, because New York City, Texas, and California could pull it off, and everybody else would be third world poor. Well, that's literally what the Washington Post said today, 2 years after I said that. Separate California would have the largest national median income in the world. What's key here is that the Washington Post was pointing out how everybody in America would be poor if you separated on your own, except for California. So their argument was secession is silly talk in America for 49 states. Oh, yeah, I guess, by the way, there's California. And yeah, technically they could pull it off. And they would be the richest country in the entire planet. I just love the fact that the Washington Post trashed everybody else pursuing secession, even Texas, backed up my point that I made 2 years ago, and then also still had to admit that California would basically live better off independently than it would as part of America. Washington Post. Now, one of the things I didn't like was that the article, again, talks about how you can't pursue secession. And it goes into, let me just read a little bit. Quotes from the Washington Post. But the legal process of separation is profoundly complicated, and the laws of the United States render it much more difficult to achieve than it is elsewhere. Both the Texas and California separatists have their arguments about why separation is constitutional, drawn from esoteric readings of Texas versus White, an 1869 Supreme Court decision about the legality of state bonds, but generally there is consensus on the point. I cannot imagine that such a question could ever reach the Supreme Court. Justice Antonin Scalia wrote in 2006, to begin with, the answer is clear. If there was any constitutional issue resolved by the Civil War, it is that there is no right to secede. The separatists responded with the obvious fact Scalia admits, technically, the constitutionality of secession has never been tested in the Supreme Court. I'll show you where the article says that, but first I want to point out how this is wrong, how Antonin Scalia, a Supreme Court justice, is wrong, and how the Washington Post, quoting him, is wrong. These are bonehead mistakes. They should all get this, which is why I think they're lying and they're intentionally trying to mislead you, because this is basic stuff. So, number one, Texas versus White says you can secede through consent of the states. Washington Post can't admit that. So they're just saying Texas versus White is this silly court decision, esoteric, nobody should look at, and basically doesn't mean secession can happen. And then they somehow make sure to not omit the phrase that states can secede through consent of the states is literally printed in the document. Why omit that key phrase? while talking about how that article or that court case says nothing about secession positively. I think that's interesting that you won't mention the key phrase that both the Texas and California movements are talking about, but you'll talk about how the court case is garbage. It's almost like you don't want people to see that phrase. The other thing that Justice Scalia and the Washington Post get wrong are two things. One, the Civil War was not a legal decision. It was a war. In every war, there is a peace. They call it suing for peace. And you have to write a legal document that both sides agree to settle the peace. There's also something called an armistice, which means a cessation of shooting at each other or trying to kill each other. It is not the same thing as a peace, nor has it been for the last 500 years of human history. So America has an armistice with North Korea. And the South and the North in the Civil War had an armistice with each other. And they signed it at Appomattox Courthouse. That was the two generals saying we will cease hostilities currently. That is not the same thing as saying we agree that you were right and we were wrong, and we're going to be part of your legal protocol and submit to whatever you're doing. Famous example is World War II. Japan was bombed to hell, and they basically were quitting. The emperor said we had to quit on radio. Okay, that was not the end of the war. All that was a cessation of hostilities. The actual end of the war with Japan happened when a Japanese officer got on a battleship off the coast of Japan and signed a document for peace. So armistice means cessation of hostilities. Peace treaty means actual peace. Appomattox Courthouse document was not a peace treaty. Abraham Lincoln Constitution saying constitutionality of secession is wrong isn't even legal. The Constitution says the Supreme Court decides those decisions. The president is the executive. He is only allowed to execute the law, not interpret the law. So Lincoln had no legal right, according to the Constitution, to do that. And he wasn't even supposed to do that. And that's not the way wars work. It's a decision made afterwards, not the actual war that settles the question. So you can't say that a war settled the question. You have to say the peace treaty settled the question. Look at American England. The war did not end after, I'm forgetting the battle, but Lexington or Concord, or after they captured that British general up north in Vermont. The war ended in Paris, France. It's called the Treaty of Paris. It was the agreement that America and the English signed that actually ended the Revolutionary War and created America. Just because a general quit and submitted to George Washington wasn't the end of the deal. That was the end of the war. That was not the creation of America. The Treaty of Paris created that. The Japanese had to sign an agreement to do this. The Appomattox Courthouse was not a peace treaty. So all of this is being admitted by Antonin Scalia and by the Washington Post. They're just acting like wars decide conflicts and that's accepted as it is. No, it's never been that way. Not for 500 years. You have to sign an actual peace treaty by recognized members of both governments agreeing to it. That's the peace terms. They didn't do that. So no, that's not legally settled. Secondly, the President Lincoln is the executor. He is not the judiciary, so he can't settle legal arguments. The only Supreme Court case came after the Civil War, Again, Washington Post conveniently ignores the fact that Texas versus White came after the Civil War. The entire legal framework of America is the opposite from England. In England, they have common law, and in a lot of European countries, they have common law. Basically, it's a series of laws built up over times from medieval times, and they base their law off of decisions made before. In America, they don't do this. They have case law. If you're a lawyer, you study cases because the entire legal framework is based upon cases, meaning that the highest court to make a legal decision is the precedent for everybody. And you have to study that and make your arguments based upon what a previous court decided. So what that means is that the most recent decision is the most relevant. For example, the Supreme Court struck down slavery. We don't say, you know what, that's an esoteric decision by the Supreme Court to strike down slavery. Let's go back to the earlier decision 30 years earlier where the Supreme Court said slavery is cool. We don't do that because of something called stare decisis, case law. The most current case was that slavery is wrong. So all future decisions have to be based upon that, not something earlier. Civil War happened before Texas was white, which means even if it was a legal decision, which it wasn't, It doesn't matter because that's not the way the entire American legal system works. Secondly, the executive is not supposed to interpret the law. That's not the way the entire American legal system works. So I find it incredible that a former Supreme Court judge could get that wrong and that the Washington Post quoting that could also get that wrong. Interesting. Almost like they wanted to mislead you. Can't admit that. Let's take a look at the article. Here's the Washington Post article, just so you can check it out yourself. Washington Post, secession is not likely, published by Stephen March, December 31st, 2020. Let me show you a little bit about where they're talking about, all this is garbage and they mislead you completely about the legality of it. Again, not presenting the phrase secession is legal by the consent of the states, which was in there, not representing stare decisis, not representing the unconstitutionality of the president making legal decisions. Here's another thing. This is the interview with Ryan Griffiths in January 7th, 2020 that I did. Almost no one watched it, 33 views. Now, Washington Post is interviewing Ryan Griffiths and saying the same thing. He's in here somewhere. Right, Ryan Griffiths. Ryan Griffiths is saying there will be another secession movement in the United States. Washington Post. Here he is saying it almost 2 years earlier. Also on the legality of seceding, if you type in, it is legal to secede, and all these professors of law and scholars of history say so. This is not my opinion. So we put this together. 3 California attorney generals said this is correct. Becerra, who works for the federal government, Keenely, Kamala Harris, who also works for the federal government now, and then all of these additional professors, Jason Sorens, Michael C. Dorff, Lily Rothman, William Murphy, Clifford F. Theus, Stanford Levison, Danny Savalos, Scott Schaefer, Stephen M. DuVernay, James Rogers, Stephen J. Kaufman, and George M. Lynn, Ruth Ann Robson, Daniel Farber, David A. Carrillo. There's the article. Lots and lots of professors saying my interpretation is the correct legal interpretation, which means that Antonin Scalia and the WAPO are disagreeing with multiple legal scholars. So you can come to your own conclusions from that on who's right and who's wrong. Again, that article was the Washington Post. Secession might seem likely. A lesser of two evils, but is also the least likely. And we just showed that that's mostly complete garbage. Okay, let's go to the next article in 1 second. Next article we're going to cover is by the Boston Globe. America's closer to civil war than any of us would like to believe, a CIA advisor says. We'll cover that article. We'll cover the quotes. Then I'll show you the source. You can pick it apart if you want. That CIA analyst predicts civil war in this article. It is a real CIA analyst who studies dissolving countries and says that America is showing all the signs. She's not doing this to be jingoistic. She actually works for the CIA, does this analysis for the CIA. Federal law prevents her from doing this analysis on behalf of the CIA. So she left and wrote her own book on her own so that she could do the analysis legally. And it's coming out soon. And that's why she's saying America's closer to civil war than ever. She's one of the top experts that could be able to make that call. Additionally, multiple American generals have recently said they're worried about the democratic stability of America, and America has also been placed on the list of backsliding democracies for the first time ever. Let's go to some quotes. The U.S. is closer to a civil war than any of us would like to believe, a key member of the CIA advisory panel said. If you were an analyst in a foreign country looking at events in America, you would go down a checklist assessing. What you would find is that the U.S. has entered very dangerous territory, little quote. At the same time, 3 retired generals wrote in the Post that they were incredibly concerned about the aftermath of the 2024 presidential election. And finally, for the first time in history, the United States was added to a list of backsliding democracies in a report released by the Stockholm-based institution. That's coming out this year while Biden is president. No, he did not fix it. So let's take a look at some of these other articles. America's closer to the Civil War than any of us like to believe, the CIA advisor says. Here's the article itself. Barbara F. Walter is the professor of political science at the University of San Diego. She did this interview. It was on CNN, How Civil War Stopped. And she's saying America's closer than ever. No one wants to believe their democracy is in decline or headed towards war. She writes in the excerpt, if you were an analyst in a foreign country looking at events in America, the same way you look at events in Ukraine or the Ivory Coast or Venezuela, you would go down a checklist assessing each of the conditions that make civil war more likely. And what you would find is that the United States democracy, founded more than 2 centuries ago, has entered very dangerous territory. There she is again. This is the professor. And then there's talk about January 6th. Here's the 3 retired generals recently wrote in the Washington Post. They raised alarm, shared concern about the aftermath of the upcoming 2024 presidential election and the potential for lethal chaos inside our military. In short, we are chilled to our bones at the thought of a coup succeeding next time, 3 sitting generals said. Also, for the first time in history, the United States was added to the list of backsliding democracies in a report released by the Stockholm-based International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. So that's the Washington Post article, this one right here. I'm sorry, the Boston Globe article. CIA analyst says America's falling apart. It is mirroring failing countries. 3 generals for the first time have said that they're worried about the institution of democracy in America and see it as a national security threat. At the same time, America has been listed on the list of backsliding democracies for the first time ever. So not good news and does not show stability of America. I'm realizing that I made a mistake. Let me show you some of the sources for the previous article. I apologize. Give me 1 second. I'm going to fix this right now for y'all.
So, Professor, do I have your permission? You do, yes. And this will
Okay.
like post this on your website. What's the outlet for it? Yep.
So I already covered the previous article, but let me cover the sources. I apologize. I forgot. Here they are. So let me show you the sources. This is for the Washington Post article I just covered. I'm not going to review the material again, but here's the sources just to show you they do exist. This is the Washington Post article. Secession might seem like the lesser of 2 evils. It's also the least likely. Covers all the material that we covered therein before. Here's the article with Professor Ryan Griffiths, dated January 7th, 2020, that I did with him. And here's the article, It is Legal to Secede, and all these professors of law and scholars of history say so. 3 sitting California attorney generals, multiple other professors backing up the interpretation I gave of Texas versus White and the legality of secession based upon that law and an understanding of the American Constitution. Total opposition to Justice Scalia and the Washington Post article. So just wanted to get that straight so that you could see we did have sources for everything. Oops. Okay, and now we'll go to the next section. Give me 1 second. Now we're going to go to this article. This came out by The Hill. The Hill is a political magazine. It covers politics. So when it makes this argument, it's kind of key. So The Hill said the Constitution isn't working. The Hill is not a general newspaper. It covers politics. It covers Washington, D.C. policy. So they're specifically saying the Constitution of America doesn't work. We should pay attention because that kind of legalese framework they're really skilled at looking into. Now, here's what that article is going to show you. A professor says the American government no longer functions. It points out what I said over a year ago, that a minority of states who don't share California values control the entire country, and that's why America is doomed to not function in the future. And the article points out again what I said about 8 months ago: Biden did not unify America, and things are not going to get better. Let's take a look at the exact quotes. Although it is early in the Biden presidency, voter disenchantment is already clear, and the unity he promised in his inaugural address seems to be as elusive as ever. Quotes, it won't be enough to merely reform the filibuster, add more justices to the Supreme Court, change presidents, or surrender presidential powers to Congress. The Electoral College is poised to create more misfires, as happened twice. The territorial expansion has resulted in 16% of the U.S. population controlling half of the seats in the U.S. Congress. This is what we had pointed out earlier. So you may have the Constitution, you may have rights, but the Constitution was designed to enshrine states to vote and not people. So originally, the states got to pick their senators. The states still have massive control over the Senate. The Senate can block all legislation from the House, stopping any legislation from created in America. The Senate also gets to approve all of the justices on the Supreme Court nominated by the president. So the Senate can control the congressional powers, making all laws stopped. And it can also affect the Supreme Court, a third branch of government, making sure that you don't get justices who would review those laws the right way. That's baked into the states. On top of that, the states also have the Electoral College, where they get to choose the presidency. So this article saying the Senate has 16% of the American population controls over half of the Senate. So 16 tiny little rural states with little populations in the middle of America who don't deal with minorities and immigration and international trade and all the stuff that we do get to choose whether America gets to have any laws that it wants, and they get to choose what the Supreme Court's going to be like, and they get to choose who's going to be the president. So the only thing they don't really have control over is the House, but the House can propose legislation and the Senate can block it. So basically these 16 states, or as I was arguing, 32 and about 25% of the population, they're going with 16 states and half the population. I'm sorry, they're going with 16% of the population. That's right. 35 states own about 16% of the population, but they own over half the power. They can control the judiciary, who interprets the law. They can control who gets to be president, and they can control any laws that get passed. So minority states now have a complete lock on the entire federal government, and nothing can change that until you have a constitutional convention, because the entire Constitution was built to give power to the states. You would literally have to blow up the Constitution and rewrite it from the beginning. Good luck with that. And again, I pointed out some of the things they're saying on January 11th, I think 2020, about how America is about to lose all its rights. So let's take a look at the article. Constitution Isn't Working by John Kenneth White in The Hill. Just 38% of Americans in recent Gallup poll expressed a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in the presidency, down from 48% in 2001. Congress, never high in the public's estimation to begin with, fell from 26% to a mere 12%. The Supreme Court has also taken a hit, down from 50% to 36%. So they're showing nobody really has any faith in federal institutions anymore. Disappointments in presidents, George Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump has become the norm. Nobody really believes that the Supreme Court is anything but political hacks anymore. They don't believe that they are independent. More and more, just the whole thing's falling apart, and it's the end of the world. I pointed out the same thing here. So in 2020, January 11th, about the beginning of 2020, we're in January 2022, so 2 years ago. I was a little chubbier, but hey, nice beard. Here you go. Here are the states that are red, that have 16% of the population, and basically control the entire federal system.
Being approved by law. Yeah, you can also made a prediction a couple
There's
years
another
ago.
picture of it. So I made the prediction 2 years ago. Now the Washington Post is saying the same thing. It's basically broken because everything goes to 16% of the population. This one right here. So again, something we covered at YesCal, or I covered 2 years ago. Again, fringe movement, now in mainstream news. You just saw another article by another publication saying this concept is being normalized. There was a professor that I interviewed, nobody paid attention to, saying the same thing now in a mainstream publication. 2 years ago, we talked about how these states are eroding democracy in America. Now it's in a mainstream publication. So those are two instances of we covered the news, nobody cared, and now it's in the mainstream 1 to 2 years after we said it. See a pattern? All right. We're going to go to our final article after a quick break. Okay, let me cue this up for you. 1 second. There's a lot of references for this one. There's the national divorce. One second. Not there anymore. Okay. Okay, so the next article we're going to cover is by the Deseret News, also Newsweek and Washington Times. So I'm going to quote the Deseret News primarily, but there are 3 publications that all came out saying the exact same thing. I have thoroughly covered what happens when the media attacks you. You get different publications that seemingly come from different sources, one on the left, one on the right, one in the mainstream, and they all say the same thing. So it appears that you have a national consensus on a point when you don't. That's the system attacking you because you did something that scares it. So Marjorie Taylor Greene really scared the system because they attacked the hell out of her recently, lying about what she said. We'll get to that. But again, when you have multiple news publications all come out, all saying the same thing, almost in coordination, and they typically don't coordinate because they're on different sides of the political spectrum, that's the system attacking you. We've covered that thoroughly. So here's what we're going to see. Marjorie Taylor Greene mentions that peaceful divorce is better than a violent civil war, and she is immediately attacked by the media. The media tries to point to the discussion of national divorce as automatically meaning civil war and not a peaceful option. And the media takes the same angle as Bill Maher. The solution to fixing America's democracy is to just stop having free speech and discussing ideas. We'll get to all of that. So here are the quotes. You know what is necessary about a threatening divorce? It's a wake-up call to the one offending the other that they've had enough. And if the other party cares at all, they will look at what they're doing wrong and care to fix it. National divorce is not civil war. That's what Marjorie Taylor Greene said recently. Now, you cannot find that quote on Twitter. That was called inflammatory and treasonous, and it was taken down. I'm going to show you the whole thing. You know what is necessary about threatening a divorce? It's a wake-up call to the one offending the other that they've had enough. And if the other party cares at all, they will look at what they're doing wrong and care to fix it. National divorce is not civil war. Marjorie Taylor Greene, December 30th, 2021. That was called incendiary and ripped down. Now, the tweet that countered her was covered and still is up. So she makes a tweet that's ripped down. And then 3 articles attack her. These 3 articles quote this guy and his tweet is up. So bad tweet taken down and criticized by 3 articles. Good tweet posted up and covered by 3 articles. What does the good tweet say? Well, it's by Ruben Gallego on December 29th, 2021. There is no national divorce. Either you are for civil war or not. Just say it if you want a civil war. Officially declare yourself a traitor. So Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying that the country is getting closer to civil war, and that will result in a violent conflict. Better than violence is to have a peaceful national divorce. This person is saying peaceful national divorce means violent civil war. So Marjorie Taylor Greene has been spending the last year trying to say these 2 concepts are separate. We could have a violent civil war or a peaceful national divorce. Now this politician saying those are the same thing. You say peaceful national divorce, you mean violent civil war. End of story. Total opposite from what Green has been intimating this entire time, and opposite from what everybody who's been talking about national divorce has been saying. Everybody covering national divorce is saying, who's a supporter of it, is saying this is the peaceful alternative to a violent civil war that may be coming. Now, Newsweek, Desiree, and Washington Times are saying, no, that's all wrong. Peaceful divorce means violent civil war. So they're taking the term, this movement's growing, peaceful divorce movement's growing, violent civil war is trending down. The system needs rebels to pursue violence so that it can crush them and be supported by the public. We've covered that many times. The system needs you to be violent so that it can crush you and it will be supported by the public. If you're peaceful and it crushes you, people turn against the system, like with Martin Luther King. You become violent and they crush you, the system, people support that, like the Malamar Wildlife Refuge when they had guns. So MLK, peaceful supporters, they had trouble coming after him. Malamar Wildlife Refuge, everybody has guns, no problem coming in and killing a guy and being supported by the public. So what they're trying to do is say, all of you peaceful activists, you actually are violent civil war activists. That's what you really want. Another quote from the article, stop seeing divorce as an option, ask others to stop using the word divorce. So that is exactly what Bill Maher said on the topic of national divorce. The way that we can get the country back together is just not discuss our problems with each other. So here's Desiree News repeating the same thing as Bill Maher, two mainstream sources saying, you know how we deal with national division? Just don't discuss ideas or have disagreements. That's as un-American as you can be. And that's not democracy. So the way to keep America together and democracy together is to not have democracy and not act like an American as they've been since 1776. So you're going to keep America together by not acting like Americans, and you're going to keep American democracy functioning by not using democracy. That's the suggestion being made by the Desiree News and Bill Maher in order to deal with the topic of national divorce, while the Desiree News is also publishing this lie along with, let's cover this again, Newsweek and Washington Times, where they're saying peaceful separation means violent civil war. That's the cause they're really trying to push now. Another thing they say is, as the National Review editor Rich Lowry wrote for Politico. So we'll cover that in a second, but Rich Lowry in the National Review wrote an article called National Divorce is a Poisonously Stupid Idea. And we dissected the hell out of that. We showed you how multiple conservative authors dissected the hell out of this article. And basically his points are all garbage. Well, this defunct article that was shown to be all garbage months ago is now being re-pushed up. So it came out, national divorce talk is horrible and bad and stupid, really dumb arguments. A lot of people trashed that. It went down. Now it's being brought back up. Hey, by the way, there's this great article by Rich Lowry that says why we shouldn't do this. That's debunked. And they use some of his exact same attack points that we've already covered in videos here. Attack number one, disaggregated United States would be instantly less powerful. It's what Russia and China would want. The United States is a continent-wide free trade zone, creating a vast domestic market that makes us all better off. Exchanging that for balkanization of the market would be destructive to the economy of all the states. And the United States, foundering on its domestic divisions, would be the slightest significant blow to the prestige of liberal democracy. Couple points. We've already covered this, but number one, America is not handling Russia and China well right now as a cohesive body. Let's be clear. So China gets to have a genocide in the Uyghur territory. Disney backs that and says that's cool. Biden goes on TV as president and says he's going to do nothing about it. The Chinese are constantly abusing human rights and basically doing whatever they want. And America is not stopping them. They're also not countering them in the Pacific. So what exactly is the U.S. doing that's so scary to the Chinese as a cohesive body? Because Biden is basically doing whatever they want. Now let's take a look at Russia. I'm not going to get into Trump versus Russia, but Russia wanted a gas pipeline from Europe to Russia allowed. Biden allowed that. Russia has not been pushed out of the Ukraine either. And Biden went begging to Russia to lower gas prices. So how is begging the Russian president for gas prices, not pushing them out of the Ukraine and giving them the main economic driver that they wanted, pushing back on Russia? And how is excusing genocide in China and letting them do whatever they want militarily throughout Asia, pushing back on China? So where do we get the idea that a cohesive United States is actually pushing back? I would argue the opposite. America is divided. Anytime America wanted to do something tough on Russia, the Republicans were pushing back. And anytime America wanted to do something tough on China, the liberals were pushing back. So how exactly is a cohesive America taking on Russia and China now? If we were actually politically divorced, you would have liberals in one section and a large conservative body who could make decisions quickly. The conservatives do not like China. The liberals have a problem with Russia. If we're not bickering with ourselves, we'd actually be able to do cohesive actions as separate independent bodies in co-alignment to push back on these forces. Right now, we are a chaotic body who can't really do much against either one. So how's that better? Again, not mentioned by Lowry or this article. The United States is a free trade zone, and if there's secession, that will end. That's total garbage. So if you looked at the trajectory of world history since the fall of the Soviet Union, everything is going to free trade zones. NAFTA re-signed the NAFTA agreement, reaffirming free trade. So one of the first free trade zones was Mexico, America, and Canada, and then it was reauthorized. If there were separate states, why would we not do free trade? Additionally, all of the American free trade agreements going back to the 1930s were sponsored by Californians. You can read the book Global California Rising to the Cosmopolitan Challenge by Professor Abraham Lowenthal. He points out California was about international trade in the 1930s. So the UN, the World Trade Organization, NAFTA, all of that came from California. If California separated and we were the ones pushing for international trade, and the entire trajectory of the entire planet is world trade, why would we not have world trade if we separated? That makes no sense at all. Finally, if America had a state or two secede, it would be a blow to democracy and dictatorships would take over. Look at the Pew Global Survey. No one thinks America is a good example of a democracy anymore. Not in Latin America, not in Asia, not in Africa, and certainly not in Europe. So there is nobody impressed by American democracy who's saying, let's hold on to it because of America. That doesn't exist. Check out global surveys. That's a lie. Let's cover some of the sources. Here you go. What is national divorce? Desiree News. Here you go. Here's the opinion article. Dangerous rhetoric. She's a bad person. Here's the quote by Marjorie Taylor Greene, which you cannot see on Twitter anymore. It was removed because they said that was treasonous. I don't see how it is. She's talking about discussing national divorce. We're allowed to discuss ideas in America. Treason and insurrection is defined as America's in a shooting war with a foreign body. And you say, I like those guys, or I want to help them, or I want to give them aid, like Jane Fonda standing next to an anti-aircraft gun. Marjorie Taylor Greene has not said, Al-Qaeda's cool. North Korea's awesome. I want to give weapons to Qaeda terrorists. I'd love to support North Korea. And technically, America has not said it's in a war with Russia or China. They call them strategic competitors. And according to the law, in the last 200 years of American history, you have to declare them as an enemy and declare war. That's happened. So what they're saying about Marjorie Taylor Greene, frankly, isn't correct and never has been in all of American history. But they cover this other guy who criticized her and said, you're so stupid. Very well. Anyways, you can see that. Oh, here you go. Here's the other article by Newsweek saying the same thing. So this is one article by Desiree News saying she's a traitor and a bad person, and she basically wants a violent civil war, even though she says peaceful national divorce. Here's another article by Newsweek saying the exact same thing. Here's another article by Washington Post saying the exact same thing. So you saw the sources, you saw the quotes. Let me make sure it covered everything there. Okay. Now, a little bit more. Here you go. Good times. Hello, my name is Marc Ruiz Evans. I'll be your host of Power in America. Wow. And he happens to write is called. Okay, I'm going to show you the videos where we covered the arguments against the Rich Lowry article. Here you go. So National Divorce Talk by Yes California, November 14th, 2021. We covered the Rich Lowry articles and how they were garbage. California Nationalist, National Divorce has achieved a tipping point. Nice haircut. On October 30th, 2021. Again, on the Marcus Ruiz Evans YouTube channel, we covered that. And then here we go again with National Divorce and how they are arguing against it with erroneous talking points on November 7th, 2021. So if you like to watch, you can go to the YouTube channel November 7th, October 30th, or November 14th, and you can see where we cover this extensively. The Rich Lowry points are total garbage and were decimated. And we're going to go to our final segment, which I have just a few seconds to knock out right after this break. So I didn't have time to prep this one so well. I apologize. But basically, Michael Malice did an interview with Lex Friedman where he was talking about national divorce and how it is a peaceful alternative to violent secession, the same thing Marjorie Taylor Greene said. He also pointed out how Rich Lowry, in his article attacking national divorce, it was total garbage. So I just got done talking to you about how Rich Lowry came out with this article months ago about national divorce, full of garbage points. And we defeated it. Then Michael Malice took it on. I took it on a few other people. And then I showed you how the mainstream media is reprinting those articles without pointing out the illogical points he was making. And Michael Malice, at the same time that the media is reprinting the Rich Lowry article, points out his arguments against the Rich Lowry article. So the Rich Lowry article is a definitive part of this discussion. The media pushed it, and then it got pushed back. Now they're re-pushing it, and at the same time they're pushing it, here's another famous guy repeating his points that he already made about why this article is garbage. So let me show you this. You can take a look, and then we'll cover it from there. So here's Michael Malice, National Divorce Explained on the Lex Friedman podcast. And he's talking about how the Rich Lowry article is garbage, making a lot of the same points that I did. And it's a pretty good interview. Both guys are pretty smart. The issue that I had with Michael Malice is one that many others make. They routinely talk about California and how national divorce would be difficult here and very violent here, and they are not from here. So I'm actually born in Fresno, the Central Valley. I was raised here, and I moved back. And I wrote the book on CalExit, and I've done the most data mining on how a potential vote would go. I've looked at projections of voting from multiple different sources, looking at how they would go, multiple sources, there you go. And I broke out how a vote would go piece by piece. Also looking at population, economics, connection between economic regions, water, farming. This is the economic driver region. As you can see, these regions that we might lose the vote in are going to be minimal and not where most of the activity is. I mean, Reading a little bit, but largely most of the economy stays intact. Transportation grids, rail line grids, freeway grids, water grids, university systems, major university systems, power systems, water systems, etc. Everything is looking at, including the indigenous and how we could deal with that, and also some of the military bases, police, uniform. This is also how we wouldn't lose much economically, where we'd be still able to do international trade and work with everybody. We'd still have most of our food. It talks about what we'd lose and what we would maintain. But here's the point. Michael Malice is pointing to the 2016 and earlier elections. And if you look back in California's history, we were conservative in the Central Valley. But I want to point you to this 2020 map. Blue, 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 blue. Blue, 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 blue. Light pink, that's going to turn blue. This is going to turn blue. This is holding on red. This is holding on red. And this is holding on red. This is Jefferson. And you can even see in the 2016 election, they lost that one. And these areas here were blue, and these areas were blue. So they went a little bit red in 2020, but they were hardcore blue in 2016. What that means is that the Central Valley is turning liberal. And I get nobody wants to hear that. Certainly not conservatives. So Stratham was a conservative in 2017, and he said this is the way the conservatives and liberals go. Nigel Farage came here and said, hey, this is all conservative, this is liberals. Jeff Stone, a sitting congressman, said this is all conservative, these are all liberals. New California, when Trump was around, said this is conservative, these are all liberals. Here's the actual truth. These are conservatives, these are liberals. So conservative group is projecting the majority of the interior is conservative, with the strip along the coast being liberal. Here's the actual reality based upon voting patterns over the last 10 to 15 years. And if you look at this article, you can see that basically economically, transportation-wise, almost anything, we could frankly lose these areas and that'd be fine. Additionally, these areas are voting districts. So they're not, this isn't a county split up into two regions. These are all counties cohesively combined and also matched with voting districts. So you would literally leave cohesive county wholes or voting districts out, and most of them are in the far north mountains and not part of the economic system. And again, this is based upon voting, not wishful thinking. Michael Malice does not get that because he is not from California. He is not from the Central Valley. He's an outside conservative, and he's still living in fantasy land where they think that California is like it was in 2010. Things are changing rapidly. The Valley is becoming majority liberal because of a group of people that look like me, Latinos with brown skin. What I find interesting is a lot of white people in the Midwest projecting how things are going to go. And I go, have you ever talked to Latin people out here? Yes, they are religious and economically conservative, and they hate racism. So they will not be going with you in your future breakaway nation. Have you heard of a thing called cities have 4 to 5 times the population of the county and trump that vote? Yeah, it's called Bakersfield and Fresno, and soon to be Visalia. So the reality isn't there. California could secede. We might have a few counties break away in the mountains, and we'd otherwise be cohesive and whole, and everything would work out just fine. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. A lot of data in there. I understand we took an hour, but nobody's going to present this information to you. Nobody's going to present the background information to you so that you could do your own sources. Everybody's going to trust for you to just hear their headline and go with what they say. We are the only group saying, here are the facts. We'll cover them in detail, show the sources, and make sure that you have the correct information to move forward. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.